Welcome back to Taiwan versus the world. Today we will comment on two major recent events that impact our country. One is the presidential election in Honduras, which has finally seen the validation of the election of Nasri Asfura as president. This is significant because he has openly talked about doing what would be the first switch of recognition back to Taiwan in decades. We will also comment on the recent Chinese exercises around Taiwan, or rather, since you've already heard too much about them for sure, we will comment on how they are covered and what you should keep in mind when hearing about such operations. And now, let's dive into our interview. Today with me to talk about the new president of Honduras and how it relates to Taiwan, we have Ellis and Fernando Ramos. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon. Good to be on the program.
Good afternoon. Nice to be here.
I would kindly ask both of you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. My name is Juan Fernando Ramos. I come from Honduras, and I've been living in Taiwan for the past 10 years, and I write for several news outlets such as The Strategist, The Taipei Times, The Diplomat, and Nikkei Asia.
Good morning. I'm Ellis. I'm the Latin America research professor with the U.S. Army War College in Washington, D.C. area, and I've been covering China, Latin America for about 25 years now and focusing on Latin America security issues and of course, Taiwan.
Thank you, and good to have you both. I believe you are in excellent positions to tell us what this new election in Honduras means for Taiwan. As a reminder to everyone, Honduras used to be what we call a diplomatic ally, meaning that it recognizes the government of the Republic of China in Taiwan rather than the People's Republic of China, but switched to recognition to Beijing when the incumbent president was elected a few years ago, and now the president-elect is apparently well disposed to switch back to Taiwan. So what can you tell me about Nasri Asfura? Can you please tell me which kind of person he is?
Well, certainly a little bit of background. Of course, Nasri Asfura was the National Party candidate who just won the election. The account was just declared. His background, he's considered fairly pragmatic. He comes, he's Palestinian by ethnicity. He earned his way up as regarded as a relatively competent administrator. He was elected mayor of Tegucigalpa in 2013. Again, he was credited with being relatively effective in delivering on public works projects, something that's not always easy in Honduras. But the significant thing with respect to Taiwan is that during the election, both Nasri Asfura and the centrist candidate Salvador Nasrallah committed that if they were elected, they would switch Honduras's recognition back from the PRC, to which the previous Libre Party had changed it in May 2023, back to Taiwan, and that would be enormously strategically significant. That would be the first time that such a change to a non-island, large state has occurred since Nicaragua changed back in 1990, and especially in the current context where the PRC wants to give the impression that shifts from Taiwan to the PRC are inevitable. It would be an enormous change, especially in Central America, very close to the United States.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you just said. And I also wanted to add that the relationship with Nasri Asfura and Taiwan began like in 2015. Actually, as a mayor, he came and traveled with his wife. The objective of the trip was to bolster ties between the two cities. And later on, he also had like a relationship with Taiwanese companies that were investing in Honduras, such as Dongju Group. And he always maintained this kind of admiration for the city, for its development, and because of the history of its development as well. And I think that as a person, he's known like as a hard worker. Many of the projects that he delivered were infrastructure projects that were aimed to basically release traffic, which has been a nightmare in Honduras for like the past 10 years. So because of his trajectory and also because he has been a member of the National Party for a very long time, Juan Orlando Hernandez actually named him as his successor of his movement, intra-party movement. And later he became the candidate in the past elections where he actually lost. And this time where he was declared the winner, it was the second time that he was participating as a presidential candidate.
Thank you very much for this introduction to the future Honduran president. Now the presidency for a few days more is still in the hands of his predecessor, Xiomara Castro, who, when she took office, shortly after she took office 4 years ago, switched recognition to China. Now, if I'm correct, incumbent presidents in Honduras cannot be candidates to their own succession. So there was another candidate that represented her party, but who, however, made a fairly little score as opposed to Nasri Asfoura, who got elected, and the other candidate, Salvador Nasrallah, who apparently was lagging behind Asfoura by little more than 27,000 votes. So what can you tell us about the situation in which the successor of the incumbent is being crushed by two candidates who both declared that they would switch back to Taiwan?
Sure, I'll start on that. Well, first,
Sure.
even though the vote appeared to be close and there were unfortunately a lot of questions about the voting process, the voting took far longer than it was expected. There were some problems with the with the count, although no major irregularities. They were really minor things more than anything else. But in the end, about 15% of the votes had to be recounted. When the official count came in, it actually was a little bit more in favor of Asfoura than originally expected. I think he ended up getting 42% of the vote versus about 37.1% according to the official CNE figures. And then the third place candidate, the candidate of the governing Libre movement, Rixi Moncada, I believe, wound up with 20% of the vote. But beyond what that means when Nasrallah, who has now officially been declared the victor, takes office on January 27th, 2026, the other important thing is that there were also elections for the National Assembly as well as mayors. And in the National Assembly, which has 128 members, you need, of course, 65 for a majority, 86 for a supermajority. And what's interesting is that 49, as I understand it, were won by the National Party, 41 were won by the centrist Liberal Party, and the governing Libre Party only got 35 seats. And so and of course, cooperation between the National Liberal Party is not always guaranteed. But where those two essentially opposition parties work together, they now have the possibility of having more than a supermajority. And so Asfoura comes in if he can get the Liberal Party to cooperate with a pretty significant legislative potential. And then, of course, on top of that, the big question for everyone with respect to Taiwan was there was a lot of frustration with the PRC not delivering on many of its promises. They expanded very quickly their influence. They brought a lot of reporters over. They opened up a new Confucius Institute. They won a lot of contracts, especially in the electricity and telecommunications sector. However, in terms of the ability of Honduras really to increase their exports and especially things like coffee and shrimp, it really didn't work out. As a matter of fact, the most recent figures indicated that about $8.8 billion of PRC exports were coming into Honduras. Only about $108 million of Honduran exports were going to the PRC. In other words, literally a deficit of almost 80-1, which is just amazing. Plus, you had the invasion of Chinese stores in Tegucigalpa, in San Pedro Sula, in other places. There was a fall off in business for local retail stores, problems with Chinese counterfeit goods, something where Taiwan had previously bought a lot of shrimp. Those exports had fallen with the Chinese not buying as many of the Honduran shrimp and only paying about half of what the Taiwanese used to pay for those shrimp. Shrimp exports had fallen literally by 67%. A large number of Honduran shrimp exports stores closed, something like 14,000 jobs were lost. And so really the critical question now with respect to Taiwan is, with all of that frustration, with the performance of the PRC, will Nasri Asfoura be able to use his legislative potential? Will he follow up on his commitment and switch relations back to Taiwan, which again would be strategically enormously important?
According to the last numbers that I saw, actually, like the difference was just like around 27,000 between the two candidates. He was less than 1%, point. And actually, those results are still being challenged because there were many acts that they did that the CNE, which is like the electoral authority, didn't want to review at the presidential level. In fact, there was something that it was like a special checkup that they needed to do. And at the beginning, they have accepted like 2,800, and then they just took 691 out of the list for unknown reasons. So there's still like the Liberal Party even thought that the result has already came in favor of Nasri Asfoura. There's still legal challenges, and not only at the presidential level, because right now like they're still counting for the parliament members and for the mayorships. So the numbers that we got is basically like what at this moment, like for example, the 41 liberal parliament members, those numbers are still not fixed because they are still doing like special countings because there were a lot of irregularities in the tallies. So I think that the numbers will probably hold. I don't think that it's going to be too much difference, maybe one or two parliament members from here to there. But yeah, like the results are actually like just today, like they're still like being transmitted on TV, on live TV, and they're still counting. The other thing that I wanted to say is that the frustration, it started like really fast because I think that one of the shrimp industry was one of the strongest industries that we had. And like it was mentioned just now by Dr. Ellis, basically 14,000 jobs were lost. I think that in 2023, if I remember correctly, the head of the aquaculture commission said that China only bought like one container in the whole year, which was completely against like what they had promised before. Also, they were supposed to like establish like a trade deal. So like the coffee and other like Honduran goods could, go to China like at a lower fare, but actually that trade deal never materialized. And at this point, I don't think that it will. And also, there was also like complaints about because before Taiwan did a lot of like kind of like community projects, like helping women, helping low-income students, building classrooms, and all of that was felt by the Honduran society, by the common people. While China didn't really focus on that, it was more about like headlines and announcement of big projects that didn't materialize. So there was like a sentiment among the people that Taiwan was doing more, and it was something that was felt more by regular people. And about the decision to switch back to Taiwan, I think that something that influences heavily. Well, one is that he made it, a promise campaign. Basically, he said that we were 100 times better with Taiwan than with China because of the benefits that we received. But also, it's because the support that he received from the United States government. Donald Trump released Juan Orlando Hernandez, who belongs to the same political party as Nasri Asfoura, that have been condemned to like 45 years for drug dealing and firearms charges. And that was seen as a political sign that he was like backing up the National Party. Later, just a few days before the election, he literally endorsed Nasri Asfoura and called Rixi Moncada and Salvador Nasrallah as communists that he could not work with. And the only one that it would be good for Honduras was Nasri Asfoura. And later on, while they were doing the counts, he went and said that they will be held to pay if the results change, because like the distance was like shrinking. And that to some or to many felt like a pressure to the CNE, to the Electoral Commission, to basically just certify the results as they were. So I think that the fact that he got such a big support from Trump, and that Trump right now is in this campaign like against China, I think that it will play a big role in his decision to return to Taiwan.
And if I could just clarify something, and I completely agree with my colleague on the count, but just to clarify, there were some concerns as the vote count was very close, and the Libre Party had said that they were not going to recognize the results, and there were protests in the streets that were actually impeding the count. There was actually some concern that there would be an attempt to essentially try to redo the election, but the electoral organ itself, the CNE, with a split vote, basically two of the three people essentially certified the vote, said, okay, even though technically the counting is still going on, even though technically there are the legal disputes that my colleague alludes to, the CNE had actually certified the results. So absolutely right. It's a bit of a confusing situation, and indeed, it's interesting that the CNE's results on the internet actually are different with some of the other results that are being reported from other sources. But probably the key thing is it does appear, and I completely agree with my colleague about the importance of the pressure from President Trump, which probably was received in some places less well than others within Honduras, especially the pardon of Wanderlander Hernandez was a bit controversial. But I think the key thing is certainly it appears that unless something unexpected happened, that Sfura will be inaugurated on the 27th, and we'll be going on to see if he is able to overcome PRC pressure and follow through on the commitment to return to Taiwan.
Yeah, and just to like make it a little bit more messy, so to speak. Actually, there's another problem that right now it's more like a constitutional problem, because before of the elections, the Congress was ruled basically by the Libre Party, and they made this like a special commission in which only 9 parliament members are running the government right now, are running Congress. And what they are saying is that they are not gonna certify they're not gonna do the ceremony to name the new president. So basically, they are still pushing for this idea of like counting vote by vote. And if that doesn't happen, then Congress, which is actually the whole like 128, but right now it's being represented just by these 9 members, which some consider illegal, but it's very messy. But yeah, like there's a threat by Congress that they are not gonna go through with like the ceremonial passing of power. So that's other challenge that Nasria Sfura might encounter, and that yeah, like we still don't know how that's gonna end.
That's a lot of information we just received, and I thank you both for this. And of course, this sparks a lot of questions. Before we talk again about the American influence, there is something that strikes me here. If I remember correctly, 4 years ago, during the last presidential election, relationships with Taiwan or China were pretty much not a question. Mrs. Castro, after being elected, decided to change, but that was not something that was discussed nor something that was desired among voters. However, this time it seems to be different. You kind of answered this question already, saying that it played a role because people had built up frustration with China in the last 4 years. But then the question I want to ask is, why didn't China do anything? We know that China is not shy about intervening in meddling with the politics of other countries. So why didn't they even try to interfere in this case?
I think that you make a very interesting point. And number one is the PRC has always been very subtle. I mean, you clearly see the way in which the PRC has courted influence within Honduras, and in typical PRC style has avoided overt threats. But again, you have the many people who have been brought over to the PRC, and including journalists and others. As a matter of fact, one of the numbers that I saw was that something like 772 Hondurans were brought over to China in 2025 alone. You had something like 27 scholarships going to PRC universities. They set up a new Confucius Institute. So there has been a lot of influence, I would say, behind the scenes through the media, through relationships with individual Congress people. But what remains to be seen is whether, as my colleague points out, whether or not Sfura actually is certified as president. But B, if that occurs, whether at that point there will, the economic pressure, the threats to cut projects. Again, there are a number of different contracts, for example, with Hotel, with the Electric Authority, any, and others. There are contractual relationships with individual Honduran businessmen. So what I suspect is that those contractual and legal pressures and those political pressures, but from those relationships that the PRC has built behind the scenes rather than overt threats, are what's really going to come to play again if we get to January 27th and you do have a Nasriya's Fura government. And then, of course, the interesting thing is to see to what degree the U.S. State Department, again, Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State, who was, I think, very attentive to this issue, and certainly President Trump, who has clear relationships with President-elect Asfura, will make it clear to the Asfura government how important this is, that they follow through on the commitments, or whether they kind of give a pass to follow through to Chinese pressure. And just to give two examples where I've seen this play out before. Number one was when the new government of Guyana came when I was at the State Department in 2019, 2020. It was interesting that the Guyanese government made just a modest promise to allow Taiwan to reopen a TECRO office, a commercial trade office in Georgetown, Guyana. And within 3 hours, the behind the scenes pressure was so great that the Guyanese government publicly reversed themselves. And the other, of course, was recently, a couple of years ago, when the new Guatemalan government came in. That again, there was some talk about wanting to maintain a relationship with both. The Chinese very quickly suspended a shipment of, I believe it was Guatemalan nuts. And again, a very subtle thing, but the message was, if you think that you can play both sides, we are going to, cut off all of your ability to export. And so, to me, the issue is that the PRC tends to apply pressure in very behind the scenes, very, very subtle ways, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
Yeah, and well, I think that I have a kind of like a more holistic view of like why is it that on the last election, like this China-Taiwan question was not really like such a big deal. First of all, there was an ideological component in the relationship that it was established later by Xiomara Castro, because the Libre Party is a left-wing party, and it's very supportive of Nicolás Maduro, very supportive of Daniel Ortega, Cuba. Even the candidate Rixi Moncada said that Fidel Castro was her hero, and that there was an ideological component there. There was also like the promises of access to Chinese market and developing projects. Actually, during the campaign, she had already said that in the first 100 days, she will establish relationship with China. But then there was a delegation from the United States just before the elections, and after they visited all the three parties, and after that, she didn't mention it again. It was removed from her platform. And it was more than a year, actually, since she took presidency in 2022, and the relationship was broken on 14th of March 2023. And what the reason why I think that before wasn't such a big deal is because a lot of people don't know the difference between China and the Republic of China and the People's Republic of China. When you go to the embassy, you see Republic of China and you think that is the same thing. For most Hondurans, that don't, even I, before I applied to the scholarship, I didn't know that there were two Chinas basically. And I think that for many, also it was not there wasn't really talk of changing to Taiwan in any previous election that I can remember until this one. And it was because the government wanted China to finance a dam for the production of electricity, and basically that's what they were trying to get. And that meeting happened in Brazil during Lula's the President Lula's presidential ceremony, and that's where the Minister Reina and the Minister of Foreign Affairs from China met and actually began discussing this. And it was shortly after that discussion, I think the discussion was around December of 2022. And then the rumors started that, that the change was gonna come. And I think that before, the United States also didn't care that much. I think that during the first Trump presidency, there were many countries that switched their allegiance from Taipei to China. And Trump really didn't do much about it or anything at all. I think that the first time that they recalled an ambassador, it was when El Salvador did it in 2018. And other than that, like before that, there was really no consequence. And even when Honduras tried to switch this time, when they were about to switch, there was also like a meeting with the Honduran authorities, and basically, according to reports, what was said is like, well, you also have a relationship with China, so we want to have it too. And that was basically it. There was also no consequence, no immediate consequence, at least until now that they cancel like the temporary protection status from Honduras, that around 55,000 Honduras were living in the United States with that. They also imposed a tax on the money that was sent back to Honduras. That I think it started like at 5%, but then it was like they made it down to like 1%, and it's still like hanging. And the temporary protection status was extended until kind of like 26th of February, if I remember correctly. And after that, they're either going to cancel it or extend it. So I think that probably the United States is going to extend it again to support the government of Nasri Asfoura. And I think that the United States has a very like clear intention of maybe using this support for Taiwan to kind of get a trade deal, because I think that that's the thing that Donald Trump wants the most, and it's not getting it the way that he wanted to. So we can see that, like, that support for Nasri Asfoura and calling its opponent communist and basically endorsing a candidate that wants to come back to Taipei. Right now, we just had a 1.1 billion deal in arms that also came from the United States, which some say that it's what caused like the blockade that is going on right now in these past 2 days. So I think that there will be like pressure or at least there will be some clear guidance on what the United States want. And I think that for now, that will be for Honduras to return to Taiwan.
If I could jump in, just because I worked some of these issues when I was at the State Department in 2019, 2020, although this is certainly not the official position. But what I recall is that in many ways, when Panama initially flipped, that was kind of that most recent realm of flips after the DPP came back to power in Taiwan. You had that, Varela's move took people by surprise, and then in very quick succession, you had your Dominican Republic, and then it was really when El Salvador flipped that I think there was kind of recognition that there was a need to push back. I remember it was Jeannie Mines at the State Department that then recalled our ambassadors. So my sense is that, especially after that point, there was an awareness of certain risks of Guatemala and Honduras. So it was technically under the Biden administration that the Libre government made the flip over to the PRC. But I think certainly Secretary Rubio and the team at State are very attentive to this possibility for Honduras, beyond, at least I'm hopeful, beyond just the trade deal per se. Indeed, the pushback against the PRC in U.S. strategic spaces is actually integrated into the new national security strategy that we just released a couple of weeks ago. And my sense also beyond that is that President Trump this time around especially has a personal stake. My understanding, and just some of the rumors that one hears, is there is basically a type of kind of special governance free trade zone series that were set up. There was one called Prospera, which was, of course, very, very, very important. And then, of course, Libre was trying to dismantle these structures. And so my understanding is that there are a number of also probably National Party affiliated investors who are relatively close to the White House and President Trump. So my sense is that at least I'm hopeful this time around that this is certainly on the president's radar screen, and that may have had something to do with the decision to pardon Juan Orlando Hernandez, as well as the obviously just extremely strong and perhaps unexpected support given specifically to Nasri Asfoura, not only against Libre but also against Salvador Nasrallah. So I'm at least tentatively hopeful that the president and people like Secretary Rubio understand how important this is. But we live in unpredictable times. So.
You can say that again, and just to like expand a little bit. Yes, it's true. Like there are, according to like reports, there are some like like cryptocurrency investors that actually they invested in this. It was called ZEDE, which were like basically like free trade zones that actually Honduran law didn't apply inside of them, which was considered unconstitutional. And as soon as Libre took over, like they just canceled them. And actually Prospera, which is one of the biggest one, has like a millionaire lawsuit against the government of Honduras because of all the money that they invested on. And yes, there are rumors that some of those investors are close to President Trump. So I think that I agree completely that's definitely a factor. And I think that they're also expecting that now that the National Party is going to be back in power, they're expecting for those like free trade zones to come back to life, basically.
We are, of course, acknowledging here that the United States are playing a role in all this, in the election itself, and in whatever decision the next president will take about Taiwan and China. But still, Fernando, you wrote yourself on Taipei Times today, for many voters, the diplomatic switch to China was judged not on ideological grounds, but on whether daily life improved. This is what you wrote, and this is what you both actually commented upon. So, of course, there's going to be plenty of accusations that the US are 100% behind it, but we try to find the reality, the more nuanced facts, which is that the US played a role, but were not necessarily the determining factor. So I would like to ask you both, to which extent the actions of Trump actually influenced the electorate, and also, did Taiwan do anything, actually? Because we talk here about what the US does, what China did or not, but did Taiwan do anything to try and play a role in this election?
These are very complicated questions. U.S. influence, Taiwanese influence, and my sense is that within Honduras, and again, I'm looking at this from Washington's perspective. Obviously, Fernando understands it from a Honduran perspective directly, but the view about Isfura and Juan Orlando Hernandez was complicated. On the one hand, there was a lot of frustration with the Libre Party for corruption, for not delivering on a lot of its promises, for cronyism, for certainly taking the country down a path with the PRC that was seen as very destructive. We both mentioned, of course, the collapse of shrimp exports, the invasion of Chinese products, the invasion of Chinese stores, the failure to gain exports despite the negotiations over the free trade agreement, a lot of projects that were promised by Libre, certainly with China, things like housing for hurricane victims, construction of Honduran schools that really were slow to arrive, a lot of other contracts which with a lot of questions went to PRC companies. Again, going beyond the Patuca 3 dam to a new Patuca 2 dam and another called El Tablon, which together were, I think, approaching $1 billion in new work for the Chinese, apart from Hondutel. And so I think across the gamut, not just with the PRC relationship, but I think there was a lot of frustration with Libre in general, because Libre essentially ran against Hondurans' frustration with enduring corruption, that was perceived, going back to Juan Orlando, Hernandez's government and before on the National Party. But frankly, a frustration with the Liberal Party as well. And so the irony was that on the one hand, when President Trump came in and pardoned Juan Orlando Hernandez, for some conservatives that was seen as good, but probably for many who sensed that Juan Orlando was actually convicted in a U.S. court, and there were some pretty serious, probably credible, very bad things that he had done with the narco trafficking, that was not necessarily seen as well. On the other hand, my sense is that in Honduras, there is a strong desire to get along with the United States. The U.S. is very close. There's an extremely important trade relationship, access to the U.S. market through CAFTA DR, our Central American Trade Agreement, as well as the importance of U.S. investors, both in the past and in the future. And frankly, a desire not to antagonize President Trump, and the understanding of the different military aid and other assistance, cooperation. Certainly the issue of Honduran remittances from the United States and the treatment of those Hondurans, apart from the TPS renewal, which are there. And so I think there's probably a very real sense of not wanting to antagonize President Trump, in the sense of the best way to stay on the U.S. good side was to support Esfura. So that may have had a minor impact. With respect to Taiwan, to me, one of the surprising things, to the best of my knowledge, is that the Taiwanese government, I think, kept relatively low profile on this. There certainly are important things that the Taiwanese offer as value behind the scenes. I would mention, of course, the Taiwan Allies Prosperity Project, which has benefited Guatemala and various other actors in the region. But my sense, and again, my colleague may have a different perspective on this, but the Taiwanese kept a pretty low profile about what was going on, at least thus far. So that's my sense of things.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that at a government level, like, I don't think that it's basically wise for Taiwan to try to like get close to any party like before the elections, because like China always had these very strong reactions when things like that happen, when there's like these kind of diplomatic issues. From what I read, like the ministry did say that they were like but they say it now, that they were in contact with both campaigns even before of the elections, and that right now they're in contact with the Asfura administration, with the president-elect, and they're trying to like achieve this objective of like return the relationship as it was before Xiomara Castro. I think that there's the impact of Donald Trump. There's two sides of it. One of it is on the electorate, which I think that was minimum. I think that because his comments came like it was all like the pardon of Juan Orlando, the post about supporting Asfura and all of that came like the previous week. The post endorsing him came like 3 days before the vote. So I think that at that point, like everyone had already like had their mindset. I don't really think that changed anything. And as Dr. Ellis was mentioning, the release of Juan Hernandez was very controversial, and I can tell you that the majority of Honduras didn't like that decision at all. I think that if we wanted to back Asfura, probably it would have been better to pardon him like a week after the elections, because before the elections, it brought back a lot of memories that people feel very strongly about it. And on the electorate, it didn't really have like much of an impact. If anything, I could even say that it was like a negative impact for Asfura. But I think that where it did had a lot of weight, it was on the institutions, because like Mr. Ellis said, like we are a country that basically our 25% of our GDP comes from like the money that people send from other countries, and most of it comes from the United States. So yes, people is really scared of deportations. People is really scared of like the remittances being taxed. So I think that kind of pushes like the institutions and the elites to not want to antagonize the government of the United States. And I think that's why we're seeing such contested results. That like the results took more than 20 days. I think that it was like on the 23rd, 23 days to declare a president, which like I think that the last time that this happened, it was in 2017 with Juan Orlando Hernandez, which were also accused of fraud, and there was a lot of irregularities. And that time was 17 days. I think that Mr. Ellis is right about like the influence on the institutions, not really on the voters. And I think that the government didn't really have a lot of involvement, but there was a civil society group called the Taiwan Digital Diplomacy Association, which was actually like getting news about the projects Taiwan was doing in Honduras and publicizing there. And I think that helped like people get a sense of like gratitude towards Taiwan.
Thank you, both of you, Fernando and Evan, for all these clarifications.
Real pleasure to be on the show. Thank you.
Over the past week, you've probably seen dramatic headlines about China encircling Taiwan again. This time the drills are called Justice Mission 2025, a PLA exercise held on the 29th and 30th of December around Taiwan. Of course, this is worthy of attention. Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense reported around 130 Chinese aircraft operating near the island, and more than 20 military vessels and Coast Guard ships, plus 27 rockets fired into the waters. But here is the key. These rockets were fired far, far beyond our horizon. And this is not the first time. This is not a sudden jump to all-out war. Justice Mission 2025 is actually the 6th major drill around Taiwan since 2022, part of a pattern of coercive exercises that Beijing turns on and off for political effect. Just 3 weeks earlier, China had already massed over 100 naval and coast guard ships across East Asia, including around 90 vessels inside the first and second island chains. This was a much larger deployment, and that operation didn't even get a name. When every single exercise is framed as a completely new level of threat, we end up doing Beijing a favor. We amplify the performance and turn routine coercion into imminent apocalypse. So let's try to put Justice Mission 2025 back into context and talk about how to cover these drills without becoming part of China's information campaign. And our first source is talking exactly about that.
I'm Sasha Chhabra. I'm a Taipei-based security and political analyst, and I focus on Taiwan's foreign relations, cross-strait issues, and in particular the U.S.-Taiwan alliance. And I'm a frequent commentator in Taiwanese as well as international media on all of these subjects. Well, I think there's a couple things going on, right? There's the actual military exercises that are going on, and we've seen that time and time again, and we can talk about how these ones are a little different. But there's also the cognitive effort of it, which I think is a big part. There's the issue of how they're trying to portray this, the narrative they're trying to push out. And importantly, I would say there's a huge component of how the foreign media have really failed at adequately responding to this and understanding what China's goal is. So maybe to talk on the first part, this is clearly a response to the recent large arms sale from the U.S. that's been announced from the U.S. to Taiwan, not been completed, but it's been announced. This is a very significant arms sale. It's going to, I think, significantly improve Taiwan's ability to defend itself, to hold back a Chinese invasion. And we've seen time and time again, China indicates its displeasure largely through military exercises. And these are not preparations for an invasion. They're not signs of an imminent invasion, but they're signs that China wants to invade, that they're willing to use military force against this relatively peaceful island of 23 million people who are just seeking to live in freedom. What's a little different about this one is they are getting a little closer. So that's different. They've always been getting closer, but it's not as long as some of the other exercises have been. It doesn't involve, at least what we've seen so far. We'll have to wait to see, the data when it comes out, but it doesn't seem to involve as many ships, planes, other assets as previous exercises have involved. And it's unclear yet, but we'll see what the scale of live fire has been. I don't think we'll see, missiles flying into Japan's EEZ as we've seen before. So in some respects, we can say it's a little more severe than past exercises, but in other respects, it is business as usual. And I think this is reflected in the fact that in Taiwan, people are going about their daily lives, despite what fear-mongering news is telling you. International travel is happening just on schedule. Every minute, there's dozens of international flights going in and out of Taiwan. I've seen no reports of any disruptions to shipping. So I think it's important to take a step back and think about, what are really the impacts of this in Taiwan versus how this is being portrayed in the media, which I see as really furthering China's narrative that, China has the ability suddenly to just take Taiwan, which they clearly do not at this point.
And another analyst concurs, Ronan of the Academia Sinica Institute of Political Science.
I think what is happening is that China holds military drills, around Taiwan, sort of like a warning to separatist forces. So this is what you can see in the news report across the world, like ranging from BBC or even New York Times or Washington Post. So what is actually happening is that China is trying to express its anger, and this anger needs to be expressed so that they could actually take care of the potential domestic opposition coming from their dissatisfaction of what the CCP has been doing. And yet the arms sale coming from the US to Taiwan actually is kind of like a policy choices that antagonize CCP and some of the domestic constituents they have. So it's more like a anger expression.
So why is this information treated in such a dramatic way in international media?
Normal day in Taipei sells no headlines, right? But imminent invasion will get a lot of clicks, and there's a lot of interest. And in this hyper-competitive market and social media, it's amplified, right? You have to be more sensationalist than the other. So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect is people just don't know. There has not been a good job from the international media, but also from the Taiwanese side, I think, of explaining what the reality is, how difficult an invasion actually is, what these exercises really mean, what's causing them, and of course, the status of Taiwan, which to a lot of people is still unknown. A lot of people don't know that Taiwan exists as a sovereign and independent country. And you see this in the rhetoric that China is using. They say, they want to stop the separatist forces. Well, there's no need to separate because the two sides are already separate. So I think it's important that Taiwanese and other international partners do a better job when exercises aren't going on, the other 364 days of the year, to tell the story of what's actually going on, what Taiwan's status is, and what the people of Taiwan really want.
And it's like a constant threatening of use of force, right? So this kind of threat, there's no denying that the threat is real, but the threat is not considered to be one that will be activated anytime soon. So it's a kind of threat or challenge that needs to be addressed, but it's not a kind of challenge or threat that will freak everybody out. Whereas, in the international media, you basically say that they want to, they want to make fuss about it. So a lot of, news report, they actually try to connect the military drills to the 2027 scenario. That's the reason why they say, okay, so through these military drills, China is a step further toward potential invasion of Taiwan. Whereas in this island, people actually don't make such a connection. We know that Taiwan needs to get ready for a potential Chinese assault against Taiwan, but we also know that it's very, very typical pattern where when there's something that is not in line with China's expectations.
In all fairness, this time we saw some media toning down the panic and giving a voice to the Taiwanese people, showing how they are themselves unfazed by the event. But there is a need for more effort to educate audiences in making a difference between what is real and imminent danger and what is almost like a giant movie made to scare them into submission.
I think we have to think about media as one component of cognitive warfare, right? I see a few main goals of the messages they're trying to push through this operation. And chief among them is they want to create a sense of defeatism. They want to make it clear to the Taiwanese and to the Americans that they can do a blockade or they can seize control of Taiwan. That there's no possibility that Taiwan can be independent or maintain its independence. They want to convince the Taiwanese that the Americans and Japanese won't come to their aid, and they want to convince the Americans that it'll be futile to aid Taiwan. So part of that is done through media headlines, but it's a larger cognitive effort. So I would say international media, social media, which is heavily influenced by all sorts of bots and inauthentic behavior, is really trying to push those messages through. So I would advise everyone to be careful and think about when you're writing a headline, when you're writing a social media post, are you playing into China's narratives? Are you pushing into this defeatist narrative that they want everyone to think about? The last thing I would say on that is there's a really confusing domestic political angle to this. The timing, you could say, is very inopportune. China often likes to take actions that would promote their favorite partner in Taiwanese domestic politics, which is the Kuomintang. And we've just seen Zhang Wannan, the mayor of Taipei, who's one of the rising stars and viewed as a likely presidential candidate for the next election. He's just come back from Shanghai for the Twin Cities Forum, which is one of the the main cross-strait dialogue avenues right now. This is something that Chinese heavily support, and they like to have Taiwan participating in, and it's very controversial. We've also seen the election of Zheng Liwen, who's openly supports so-called unification and is the most pro-unification, we could say, KMT leader in a long time. So with all these signals, you would think that China would turn down the pressure and try to support KMT's efforts. And so look, when they do these things, when they choose a chairman who's pro-unification, when they participate in Twin Cities Forum, we'll turn down the pressure and we'll be peaceful. But we're seeing the opposite, where even though they're doing all of these things, they're actually turning up the pressure and they're being more militaristic. So I think this sends a cross signal in Taiwanese domestic politics, and ultimately it will not help China. It will lead to more support for the Green side, led by the DPP, and the KMT will really struggle to respond to this question of, they've done everything China's asked. They've elected a pro-unification chairwoman. They've attended the Twin Cities Forum. yet somehow China is increasing the military pressure rather than drawing it back as the KMT has promised. So that's something to watch on the Taiwanese domestic political scene.
I think from the POA or CCP's perspective, what they want to create or establish is the power of coercion, so that Taiwanese people will be intimidated, so that we'll basically just give in to any or just like surrender Taiwan's sovereignty. Basically, the idea is that if Taiwanese people believe that POA is so powerful to the extent that any opposition coming from Taiwan will be in vain. Because look at the situation here. What you have is power asymmetry. What you have is arguably the U.S. being not so credible in terms of its security commitment. So if that's the case, the U.S. cannot be trusted. Maybe by the same token, China, Japan, and maybe Australia, and all the American allies in the Asia Pacific. If none of them can be trusted, and if Taiwan can do nothing to rewrite the asymmetrical power situation across Taiwan Strait, then Taiwan should just stop trying. But Taiwan should just try to dismiss this kind of narrative. Obviously, no one actually wants a war. But in order to avoid a war, you want to get ready for a war.
Other news around Taiwan this week. First, in his New Year's address on the 1st of January, President Lai Ching-te vowed that Taiwan will defend its sovereignty after China's recent Justice Mission 2025 drills. He also urged lawmakers to pass a stalled multi-year defense spending package. And also, the Pentagon has awarded Lockheed Martin a $328.5 million contract under a foreign military sale to Taiwan. This includes 55 Legion infrared search and track sensor pods and related equipment for the Air Force, meant to address what Washington calls an urgent operational need. We will talk again next week for a new episode of Taiwan versus the World.